Thank you so much for joining. I can't even begin to express how excited I am for this session. Um, we are going behind the magic on Google Cloud's speaker training and readiness. You all are in for a treat. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to cover a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the conversation. And before I dive into that, I have to say that it was very interesting and fun in the last 15 minutes. We got a bit meta on our speaker training. We were doing fire breaths and getting ready to prepare and go live. And then what was meta beyond that was um, I love Allison and Mark, and it's low key intimidating to be preparing speaker trainings to be on speaker training. And you'll have to rate me on if I did an okay job in the last couple hours.
Perfect.
Great breathing,
You're
Brian.
nailing
Great
it so
breathing.
far.
Yeah.
The fire breaths really brought me home. Okay. For today's session, we are recording on demand. We are also live on LinkedIn right now. So hello, LinkedInverse, for those of you watching over there. Please get active in the chat. We'd love to know who you are, where you're from, who you're with. We were debating on what's like a fun icebreaker question. So let us know the most adventurous thing that you did this summer. It's feeling like fall where I am here in Maine. And so summer feels like it's ending a little too quickly, but let us know what brought you joy this summer in the form of adventure. And ask questions throughout. We want to know your questions. We want to seed them into the conversation. And we're also going to take Q&A at the end for anyone that has questions. And, ooh, this is fun. Backpacking in Yosemite. Hello. This is great. Love that, Mark. Now, lastly, before we dive in, I kind of want to orient everyone here around, I think, three core motions that we're going to move throughout the conversation. And so in our time today, we're going to spend our time in three areas, starting with pre-event story development, right? So we're going to talk about the core components of story and content development, script writing with our speakers. Once scripts are locked, we'll move into the rehearsal phase and right, like how do we mentally, emotionally, physically prepare our speakers for that delivery? What is the environment that we're creating for them? And then we're also going to talk about the delivery itself, and that being stage presence and body language, vocal work, fire breaths, and more. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Excited to dive in. And as we get started here today, Mark and Allison, welcome. I'd love it if we could just spend a few minutes letting folks get to know who you are. So tell us a little bit about yourselves, your background, what you love about events and speaker training.
I'll let
Mark,
Allison
you
go
want to
first.
start or you want me to start?
Oh, you go start.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Allison Pierce. I'm so thrilled to be here talking about one of my favorite subjects ever. So I am living in San Diego, actually right around the corner from Mark. It's coincidental. And my background is a lot in TV and theater. I have my master's in drama and voice and speech. So I've spent most of my life doing that, and I've been speaker coaching for about 14 years, and I absolutely love it. I started my own company called Pierce Studios, where my team goes around the country, and we help anyone from executives to developers to influencers on YouTube, which was a gas to do it for YouTube, and lawyers, doctors, you name it, and we just have a wonderful time, and it brings us such joy. So I love what I do. And I also have an amazing 10-year-old daughter. I live with my husband, two dogs, and they're out of the house today, so you're welcome. But yeah, love living in San Diego. It's wonderful.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Mark Ferrone. I'm back in San Diego, where I grew up after spending 7 years in Tokyo and about 20 years living in the San Francisco Bay Area. And my passion for helping speakers, which kind of became a purpose, started back in doing public relations and essentially getting speakers ready to share their brilliance with the world and helping them get ready for press interviews and events and all those things that go along with being a PR manager. And that led to working on shows and content development and communications for big shows for companies like Cisco, Workday, ServiceNow, and now Google Cloud for the last 7 years. So it's been an exciting run. I love backpacking and hiking and getting outdoors. I have a 21-year-old daughter, and I'm excited to be back in San Diego. So back to you, Brian.
Beautiful, beautiful. I also share a San Diego thread. I lived in San Diego 15 years ago in North Park. So I'm jealous that you get to call life there full time. All right, let's do this. Thank you all so much for joining us. So, Mark, I'd love for you to kick us off a bit. And when we think about speaker training and we think about the content development phase, can you kind of lay a foundation for us in terms of your program planning rigor? What are the milestones that you're setting in place for your speakers? How are you helping them with content development? What does that look like as you're just starting out once speakers are selected?
Yeah, so one of the most important things we try to do is not distract the speaker from logistics and the operational logistics of the whole process that may be 2 months or more. So what we try to do is schedule all of the rehearsals, table reads, and meetings about content, even the kickoff where we talk about the timeline. We try to do all that in advance. So they're basically looking at their calendar and they're like, oh, I have another meeting. I'm just going to show up to this. So that's super important to get that foundation down. And of course, that's part and parcel of the grand content development timeline that our breakout lead creates for all the breakout. And that's usually a 6-month timeline of getting all the sessions together. And that is then part of the overall show production and operational team show about, oh, they've booked the venue. So we layer down, excuse me, into that whole process to make sure that the speakers are not distracted by that logistical elements.
Nice. So once the milestones are in place, I'm kind of curious, like Allison, when do you make your entrance into, right? Like Mark's working on the logistical component of preparing all of the content development, but you enter the scene in content creation as well. And so I'm curious, like, when do you enter the process and how are the early ways that you help speakers build an authentic story and create their hook?
It's a great question. So I enter, depending on how large the event is, I enter on production meetings early on so I can get a grasp of what the stage looks like, what are the elements, how many teleprompters, where are the video, basically all the technical aspects, so I can kind of do my due diligence and be able to say, how are we going to present this content? So I do that, and then I figure out, okay, how much time, where's our entrances, how many speakers do we have? So we learn all that in our production meetings, and then I work with the speakers, I organize the times to meet with them. Hopefully, if I can get at least 2 sessions with them, an introduction session, just to kind of gauge where they're at, what they need, what their weaknesses and strengths are, what they want to work on, what realistically can they work on, what our timeline is. And then hopefully I get 1 more second round of that development and just kind of taking what we started with and growing it and getting it better and getting them more comfortable and confident. But really, it's about taking what Mark's team does, taking the content, hopefully freezing it to some degree, getting them to trust the content, letting that side of the presentation go, and then really addressing it and how we make sure the key ideas are being listened to, make sure the audience is understanding the why, the how, why are they there? What do they want to gain from this information? When we as the speaker want the audience leaving, what do we want them leaving with? So I want to make sure that makes sense. I want to make sure the phrasing and the ideas are understood so that all of Mark's team's work and the producers and the content writers are getting all their messaging out really crystal clear, and that you're trusting and owning it as the speaker. So that's kind of what we do in Just Concession in the grand scheme of timeline for speaker coaching, from Mark's work to introducing speaker coaching and the big ideas.
Yeah, and so Brian, so what we can touch on also is after that foundation is set, it's the outline development, and that story is, what is the story that they need to tell? So it starts with creating that outline, that story arc for what that speaker or SME is going to share, and that process it's long and iterative, because oftentimes for a tech show, and the executive or SME starts with what they want to say. But we have to remind them that, oh, wait, there's an audience. What's the audience learning objective? What are going to be the 3 takeaways? What's going to be that a flow that leads people to understand and educate them on what they need to understand? But usually starts with the problems we're helping customers solve, how we're helping them. What's new? That's usually the typical priority. And then what our differentiators are vis-a-vis the industry. And then importantly, to include evidence both from the customers and partners that are helping customers solve these problems. So we usually start with that whole iterative process, and the executives or SMEs, subject matter experts, are typically pretty engaged in that process because they care a lot about this moment, high visibility session that we're helping them with.
Really nice. So I'm curious because like bouncing back to Allison, I think what you bring in the speaker training, right? Like once those key takeaways, making sure that what the speaker brings in a way that's differentiated, ensuring that that lines up to audience value expectations for those sitting in attendance, right? Like once those frameworks are built, I think we're going to kind of dance between, I would say, the art and the science of what you do, Allison. I think the art is going to come later, but I do think that there's some science in what a speaker has to portray in the first 30 seconds and up to in the first 5 minutes of when they step on stage. And so once Mark and Mark's team creates that framework, how are you setting up speakers for success, for great delivery the second they step out on stage?
So for me, sometimes I have with a lot of companies, if I don't get rehearsal or preparation with them, like, great, they're doing a rehearsal and you have 2 minutes for notes. And you can only do what you can do. So to set someone up for success is you take who they are and their strengths and try to just give them some messaging that helps them understand and articulate what they can do in reality, realistically. But I think for any speaker, the first 30 seconds is the most important. It's the hook of the audience. It's letting them on your journey, on your ride, however you want to foresee that. So the fact is that we have to learn how to ground ourselves as a speaker. We have to learn how to connect and engage. We have to breathe in the whole audience, make sure that everyone is, I know as cliche and cheesy as this might sound, it's absolutely true. And everyone here can attest to being in the audience. When you feel seen as an audience member, you feel more part of the story. You feel more part of the conversation. So if we think of it as a conversation, not as a presentation, not as speaking at or above, and we're with the audience and we're seeing the whole audience, as big as it is, it really embraces us all in the same connective tissue of the storyline. And all of a sudden we get hooked. If you breathe, if you connect, if you make sure that your messaging is clear, if we can understand you, we as the audience it's the umbrella effect. We're analyzing, do we understand you? Do we like you? Do we trust you? Do we believe you? I mean, we're going through it in our head. No pressure, right? But what we have to do is we just have to trust that we know who we are and what we do. So the first 30 seconds is imperative. So whether it's memorized or not, that's the most important, not only for yourself to ground yourself and breathe, but then also to be there and be present in the moment. So many speakers are ahead. Teleprompters, death of speech. It's their fact. It's so much of content is using teleprompters, but what they do is they suck you in. They suck the life out of the eyes and out of the soul. So we have to try so hard to work against teleprompters. So that first 30 seconds, if you can memorize, be with the audience, be present in the moment, we can tell as an audience member, and then we're there. We're there with you when we go. And then keeping it up, then it's like that first 30 seconds is the most important. And then about 4 or 5 minutes in, it's like we need to keep the ball bouncing. We can't ever let the ball drop or toss it out of the court. It's a tennis game, as always in speech. So we have to remember that we're going back and forth. Even though it's shared energy and no one's speaking back to us, we have to imagine it is a shared energy. So that's a lot to say, but I think the first 30 seconds and also the ending, because that's how they leave.
Everyone will remember.
That is most important. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the idea of picking up away from I guess I would call it the tunnel vision of the teleprompter. Um
Yeah.
and right, and like at the end of the day, like the magic of what we do through events, period, is connection, it is community.
Mm.
And I love the positioning of how do we help our speakers exemplify that from stage? How do we help them do that the moment they step on stage? Because, and I think something else, just for some context, that even the three of us were talking about before this session started, was our speaker training session a few weeks ago talked about an approach at one company where they limit sessions in time in order to deliver the most value. And I think depending on what seat you sit in, you could find a lot of value in that. And then there's also a lot of resistance to that. And I think at the end of the day, like what Allison is grounding us in is that just that authentic connection component, which I just love. So you're helping speakers establish connection. And for the rest of the time on stage, I think you're also working, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you're also working through helping connect the outcomes that Mark and the producers want to create. And you're also working one-on-one with speakers to extract their passion, where they light up, where they expand, right? So once you help speakers create connection, how are you actually helping them expand on that connection? How are you helping them infuse their passion and translating their expertise into Mark's team's expectations and deliverables?
Well, it's such a great question because so much of us, when we deliver content we know so well, we tend to be bored with it and over it because we've worked on it for so long. So it's about how do we kind of spark, we spark that joy again for speakers. So there are some, of course, tools and techniques that I use just as reminders, videoing yourself saying your favorite story, or, one of the icebreaker questions was, what was one of your favorite stories? All of a sudden people light up and their authenticity and their joy and their passion comes out. Mark and I were talking yesterday, and he started talking about something. I was like, oh my gosh, Mark, all of a sudden you got so animated and so joyful. And now, not all content is joyful, but there always is, mostly in most content, is the pros and the cons, the befores and the afters, the what's not working and what is working. So we have to remember that this is brand new to the audience. It's never been said. So how can we make the magic happen for this audience and deliver it as it's just as special as the first time, like first time student in a classroom hearing the first time the most magical thing that changed your life. That's what we have to imagine all content is. And if we remember that, then that will be helpful. Now, a lot of people are like, Allison, I'm so exhausted. I've been working 12 hours a day. This is like a side job I'm doing for my company. How do I spark that when I'm so tired? So you can do that in your script. If you're using a teleprompter, you can highlight your words in yellow just to remind yourself to kind of spark that idea. You can help yourself in bullet points, making sure that your list and your ideas and your phrasing kind of carry magic. You can put in your teleprompter smile. You can put like little jokes or little things that help you remember to kind of just like lighten it up and kind of be there and remember that this is all new. So you can help what I call score your teleprompter or your script if it's not on a teleprompter, or even in your memorization. Like maybe it's walking with a motivated movement that helps remind you it's a new chapter, it's something new and exciting. Gestures definitely help us kind of breathe in new life of our body so we don't get stagnant. So it depends. All these tips and tools can help you just remind yourself that you have to find the joy and remember why it's so important every time you speak. And it has to be new every time. And that is part of your job as a speaker. So try to build that habit while you speak.
I'm curious. I mean, this could be Mark or Allison, but like even on the other side, I think I'm curious, Mark, in hearing your response. But as you think about, right, like the outline and story arc that you've created and what Allison's doing on her end in terms of creating that hook, creating great stage presence. And we're going to peel back the layers on stage presence a little bit later in the conversation. But I'm curious, Mark, like, is there a standout story experience that you have of a speaker that stepped out on stage and infused the connection and the passion that Allison's doing on her end? Like, I'm kind of curious from the speaker training work to actually experiencing the speaker, like, is there a speaker or a story that stands out to you where you felt like all of the dots connected beautifully?
That's a hard one, but I could speak to actually surprises
Okay,
when
I like it.
which is there's maybe two. One was an executive was com- part of what makes us a successful speaker is buying into the process, and that means showing up for meetings, engaging with the team, responding to the docs when the team makes changes, and being there with the content team that's helping them write the script along the way. And it's a journey. So there was one executive that was just not buying into that whole process,
Okay.
and it's obvious. I mean, these executives and these experts have thousands of people that they oversee. They're working on developing products. They're dealing with customer issues all the time. And as Allison said, it's a part-time job. It's a secondary to everything else on their plate. But to us, it's like the only thing on our plate. It's this keynote or this big session. And this particular executive was not bought into it, and he was just working on his own pace. The day his rehearsal came, and we're like, okay, let's see what he had. And his rehearsal the day before was like, oh my God, wow, he's so good. He must have done his own homework, and it was amazing. And then the show day was like even better. We're like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. The speaker was fabulous. Like, who knew? And no one knew because it was his first big presentation. So that's one example of surprises that you do the best work and then it works out. In another case, you're working with a lot of executives where English is not their first language, and maybe that inhibits their confidence. And another most important thing is speakers that they have great confidence and they can orate well. And so there's such a high bar. If for someone not a native English speaker, they look at all these native English speakers and they think, oh my God, I have to be like Steve Jobs. It's a lot of expectation on their shoulders. But we've seen them dive in and be dedicated to the process. And they work closely with Allison, and their rehearsal that maybe we did a table read like this 6 weeks before. And then when they showed up to do the rehearsal the day before, it was night and day. And so it's a matter of being prepared for those surprises, but always setting in motion this village of support for that speaker.
Nice.
And that speaker who is trusting, and you build that trust as a team, as great content producers. They build that trust with the speaker, and then the magic happens. So those are kind of two varying cases, without naming speakers. But
I love that.
It's a very vulnerable position to be in. A lot of people, don't know what speaker coaching is. They don't know what it involves. They don't know necessarily why it would help. Majority of people, probably 95% of people, have never analyzed their voice. When I ask them questions, well, how do you feel? Oh, I get a little nervous. And then I start saying, great, how's your breath? I don't know. I never thought about it. I guess it's short. I don't know. What's the options? Okay, well, how do you feel with your hands and your shoulders? Do you hold tension? I don't know. Do you feel like you speak high or low? Are you understood? Do you speak slowly? What's your pacing like? I don't know. None of people just don't think about this. And it's one of our most powerful things as a human being. I mean, speaker coaching is not just for stage. It is for your life. It is that everyone understands you. Everyone has a voice. Everyone needs to be heard. But that also does take kind of looking in and analyzing your voice and asking the questions. So speaker coaching, hopefully, not all, they're all, as we're seeing over this month, they're so different. But the speaker coach that we kind of are, we really make sure that we're helping you understand your vocal power as well.
I think on top of that, I don't think you mentioned this in your intro, but part of, I think, the magic that Allison brings is she has this background in theater. And as I hear you talking about like the power of our voice, I also think that there's this element of like the power of our bodies and what we portray and how we hold and carry ourselves, where we punctuate in physical form, not just in vocal form. I'm really curious, like Allison, can you get a little bit more specific and dive in on like how do you use speaker coaching and speaker training to train those techniques? Like what are some of those techniques that you feel like really help people portray the message, maybe not just vocally, but also physically and in presence?
And I think stage presence is it's two, I mean, different forms. TV presentation is night and day different from live events.
Yeah.
Smaller, intimate is very different. So each arena you're in has a different kind of component and need and desire for connectivity. So you have to kind of start there, but also it all comes from kind of your posture, like how you're holding yourself. I mean, people can slouch and then all of a sudden their lung capacity gets tighter and smaller, and you neurologically tell your body to get smaller and to not give breath and life to yourself. So kind of just posture, obviously, in presence, making sure that especially different cultures use hand gestures differently. Some are very, very articulate with their gestures. Some are very conservative. Some don't move at all. Some are very tight. So really being knowledgeable of what your body language is telling, what story your body language is telling, because it's half of the story. So video yourself, doing some presentations, watch yourself, watch others, watch other speakers, do your homework, watch a billion TED Talks and executives that you love and admire, see what's working, see what's not, and see what kind of body language it is that it feels right, because it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be for you. But I think starting with your voice, and it's the body, it's like really the mind-body connection, right? So is my body and my mind all together? So much of our head always gets ahead of us when we're speaking. So again, I always come back to being present. And usually when you're in the present moment, your body follows. It's usually a little bit natural. So if you can set that up off stage 2 minutes before you go on, you use some visualizing, you kind of do your breathing. There's a great box breath where you exhale all your breath, you inhale for 4, exhale for 4, inhale for 4, exhale for 4. That's why it's called the box breath. Even just that simple thing. Visualize how big the audience is. Visualize people in the audience not caring about you and some caring about you. See it all, look at all of them. And if you can kind of start to visualize that, by the time you get out there, you've already set yourself up to know what it might look like. So it's a little bit less scary. So if we are coming into a presentation with less fear, we're usually a little bit more open. And being vulnerable is one of the hardest things as a speaker. So it's about putting yourself in the position. If you can rehearse on the event space that you're in, you will always be better. You'll be able to know how to breathe, how far to carry your voice. Do you have a microphone? Is it a handheld? How are you going to do that? So all those components working together, the more you can assimilate that in rehearsal. If you're doing a standing speech, please don't practice sitting down. It's a complete disservice. We breathe and we stand differently. So if you can assimilate everything to if you're going to be holding a clicker and a microphone, oh my goodness, please do that in rehearsal. If you're not going to be in the event space, what am I doing? Like I have so many speakers that stop their speech, they crunch their shoulders and they're clicking. And I'm like, let's not do that. How do we make it flow? If you're looking at a big iMac behind you, how do you incorporate all these components and still keep a connective feeling with the audience? So all of this to say, going back to your original question, is I think being in the environment that you're going to be in allows you to remember how to fill the space, whether it's microphone amplified, vocal live amplified, camera amplified. So rehearsing in the space and working with a speaker trainer or a producer or a director to kind of help you with your body language, where you need to be, making sure you're not shifting in a tight camera shot. So just knowing always makes you better. Preparing is the key to success.
Yeah. And I that's like a great segue into, I think, what Mark and his team of producers do to quite literally recreate the space for rehearsals. So I think there's 2 parts I want to go into, Mark. I want to talk about like how is your team setting up that rehearsal space 10 days in advance? But then there's also this concept that, I mean, you mentioned it the first time we ever met, but you mentioned this concept of the last mile and it just hooked me. And so I want to talk about like how does your team set up rehearsals both 10 days in advance and 5 minutes in advance from a speaker going live? Because I think what you all do is really fascinating.
So it's interesting, that concept of the last mile I got essentially from seeing speakers over and over continue to iterate and iterate and iterate. When as a content developer, you know that there's several stages to the content development process. There's the ideation. We've kind of got an idea, an outline, and now we have kind of a script, rudimentary script that we're going to write, and we're going to talk through it. And so we schedule these meetings in advance, and people talk through the scripts, and we call it a table read, but they end up iterating. And then we're trying to get them to transition to, okay, now it's presentation time, and now it's, here, meet Allison, she's going to help you. So it's trying to get that speaker to switch from, I'm done ideating, I'm done iterating, and now I have to practice delivery. So the word delivery, and we try to use that word more, but this culminates to a final table read before we create a stage on campus some weeks before, and it's an in-person rehearsal, and it, like Allison said, it gets them in the room to visualize, to feel what it's going to be like in front of that big audience.
And it also, Mark, also touch on, when they're in the rehearsal space, all the stage managing, because all that technical aspects plays such a part of their delivery as well. So maybe touch on that too.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was going to mention that, which is they have to get used to the apparatus. Like we said before, they're busy managing teams, making product launches, dealing with customers. They forget that they have a clicker to use to pick up, to walk to the room. They have to look at their slides. Oh, and their big diagram on the screen, they might turn around to look at it. Well, how are they going to do that? They don't know, because we've just been rehearsing on a screen like this with their slides, and they're seeing slides that they've developed for an in-person meeting, not for a huge screen, and it may look different. And what's it feel like? So, well, the other benefit.
Mark, can you touch base too on the live, when they're doing live demos? I think
demos.
That's something. I mean, yes. I don't know if everyone does that.
No, you can talk about. I'll let you talk about that in a
second.
second.
You do it. You do the live demos.
Yeah, the other thing that one of my favorite things during these analyses, I get a chuckle out of it, because when we introduce them, everyone's in the room. We actually clap when they come out in the audience. Like there's always a big clap when they come out, because that's a trigger energy. Remember, shared energy. And so that triggers them to get into their mode of, okay, I have to, this really feels like it. The other advantage of doing it on campus is the whole production team, that village we talked about, they're all there. So the person doing the sound, the person doing the slides, our whole production partner, we're one unified team, and we're kind of going for this goal, and we want the speaker to see that we're all unison supporting them or her. But Allison, go ahead and talk about the demos. It's really interesting. Same thing is that they're practicing their demo, but they do it offline, and they've never done it in person. We saw an example last week, or with the Google event, where the demo wasn't working. And so what do they do when that happens? So Allison, talk a little bit about that. I think
there are all these live events where people are excited about showing it live, because if you can do it successfully, it's really impressive, but it's a risk, it's a gamble. So everyone's just holding their breath. The demoer has to be really comfortable with improv, filling in the time where it's uploading, whether it goes awry. I mean, that you're putting a lot on a live demo. So it's also too, when you're doing a live demo, or we have a lot of speakers, some of you maybe are, you are not using a teleprompter. You don't have a confidence monitor, which is kind of like your slides at the apron of your stage, if you will. And then some people are reading off of their computer. There's a lot of these presentations. So what tends to happen is I'm doing so much of this that it's impossible to keep a connection, right? So it's like, how do you set yourself up so that really it's just your eye line that's moving down and not so much your chin? So how do we stay with an audience when my head is doing 15,000 things in a live demo or in person? We have so many of these amazing conventions that people on the floor are setting up these things. And speakers have to really start to work with, set yourself up, get in front of a bunch of your friends and run this live demo, and make sure that you're still able to breathe and connect and slow it down and not be ahead of it, but still be able to be improv with it. But I think that's with all kind of live situations that anything could happen, not just developers. So it's something to practice. Again, the more you can practice in space you're going to be in, the better. I will also say, those of you that are doing rehearsals, that you're lucky enough to do rehearsals and setups, please talk to your team about what you need to help you, especially if you're using a teleprompter. In the moment, hey, can you give me a bracket? Hey, can you make that a bullet point? Hey, can you give me a space? Hey, can you underline that for me? Help yourself, but advocate for yourself if you don't have a speaker coach to kind of score some of your teleprompter as you're going. Also, sometimes they'll just script upload, so you can just do that in your script, and then hopefully they can copy and paste that into the teleprompter. You can do that ahead of time if you don't have the time to do it in the space. But as much as you can help for yourself and advocate for what you need that will make you feel more comfortable, please do that if you don't have someone for you.
Yes, and then the other tip on the demos is always have a backup plan.
And a computer.
Yes, essentially, you always have a video to roll that you can speak to as a redundancy, because you never know what can happen with the Wi-Fi network. Yes, exactly. I think the other thing, Brian, we were talking about the last mile that is inclusive, and this is where Allison's been amazing, which is the minute before the speaker comes on stage, what's happening in the green room? Where were they before? Making sure as an SME and executive that their schedule is not so packed on a show week that they only have 20 minutes to run to the next thing. So getting kind of freeing up their time so that they can start to, feel the production and feel that they're a part of it, and not some kind of aspect outside of it, has been super important. And we've seen speakers do really, really well when they're actually, they're backstage and they're seeing all the gear, and they're walking in this, they look down at the arrows on the floor, that they're part of it. And so that's something very important. After all the work that everyone's put in, we don't want anything like at the last moment. And so Allison's really good at making them laugh before and getting them super excited. And so we find that humor actually in this moment of high anxiety actually really is helpful, and just keeping things very light, and not letting anyone run in to ask them approve a product launch before they go on stage.
And to that, I feel so many speakers, when you use a speaker coach and you value the job of the speaker coach, is all the speakers, every single one who said, I just felt so taken care of. I felt so supported. I felt like someone was there for me. There's so much expectation on all of these speakers, but no one thinks about actually taking care of them and making sure that you set them up for success. I think that is one of the biggest things that a speaker coach does, is we set you up for success. We don't just expect you to nail it. You can't expect people to nail it when you don't give them the support that they need to nail it, So I think when you give them that support and you give them that love and you give them that confidence and you can help them backstage, it makes all the difference in the world.
That's amazing. I think as you both are talking about this, I think another element of this that I actually hadn't considered until we were talking about it right now was, maybe it's different for everybody, but I know that the events that I've worked on backstage, right? Like, there are tech hiccups, things go wrong, like stress can amplify really quickly out of thin air, behind the scenes in a production. And it just, maybe this seems obvious now that I'm going to say it, so I'm just going to call that out. But like, part of how a speaker feels in the moments before they step on stage is also how your team is feeling, right? They're having touch points as they walk from the green room to side stage, right? Like, what's happening in that minute and a half around them before they actually step out behind the curtain. So I'm just thinking about like how our team is showing up and how our team reflects these same practices of presence, managing stress, extending care, is a whole other dynamic that's at play that can influence our speakers for better or worse, I suppose. I'm kind of curious, like, how do you prepare your teams backstage to be prepared in terms of how they may or may not impact a speaker, even if it's just, you're walking by a speaker in a moment of stress before they step out on stage. Is
Well,
that a factor?
no, I think so. It's interesting. It's a good question the way you posed it, but I think that in this world and in the production areas and content areas, even speaker coaching it kind of attracts people that like high intense situations, but that are able to remain calm in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say hide the stress, but contextualize the stress and anxiety and not be anxious ourselves, because we know we can't be anxious ourselves. Otherwise, that connected energy will rub off on the speaker. So, and I think that's one aspect of it, is just trying to remain calm.
Yep.
And you say in any survivor situation, don't panic. It's easy to say that, but how do you do that? Allison, what do you think?
I agree. I think you kept saying the word team, I think, and Mark maybe be able to speak to this a little bit more. I think you have to be really smart about putting your team together. Who I primarily work with backstage just before, is the content producer. I'll see Mark here and there, but Mark is doing something else on the other side. I'll get texts like, hey, we need them actually to come stage right and not stage left because the camera one is picking up this weird, like stuff like that I'll then talk to the stage manager and the stage, so there's different jobs for every speaker coach. With Google, I'm pretty involved only because I love everyone so much, and we've kind of been building this team together, and we all have a million different jobs, but I think you work as a team. But I think a good speaker coach and a good content producer assesses each personal individual need at that time. Whether I have speakers that are like, oh my God, I'm so nervous, and so I need to calm them down. I have some speakers that are like, no energy, and I need to bring them up. So and sometimes my theater background is great for this, because in 2 seconds, I have to analyze what people need and and if I know them, I can personalize a little bit more. If they're complete strangers, I have an ability to do that very quickly, of what they need, and then kind of just whether make it a joke or have them dance a little bit, or, get them out of their head a little bit, whether there's just these tricks and tools you learn as a speaker coach, but it is quickly analyzing what each individual speaker needs right before they go on, and kind of give them that so they feel supported, confident, breathing, ready, grounded to just go rule the world.
Yes, and that's a super important point, is, as so leading up to a big high visibility session, there's always a lot of people surrounding that one speaker. So part of our job is to shed those people, so that at the moment is a limited number of people telling that speaker what is important at this moment. Because on stage, there's all these different people: stage manager, sound person, there's the executive sponsor of that executive, so many other leaders, the person who wrote the content for that executive. There's everyone there that has a role in helping them be successful. But at the certain final moment in rehearsal, we try to limit the number of people that are telling them what to do, where to go, what to handle, and giving them instructions on who to direct if they have some question, like, hey, change that teleprompter or something. But Allison's so right about that, is that every team member is like a big team. You have your specific strong points, but those might be distracting to the speaker in the final moments, because they're not really contextual to that situation.
Those are great inputs. I can't believe how fast the time has gone by. I'm mindful. I know I'm mindful of what time it is. I did want to make sure I snuck in one question from Anna. Anna had asked, in terms of speaker coaching and building their confidence, have you needed to provide different strategies for virtual events versus in person? And while Mark and Allison answer, if anyone does have any final questions, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we can bubble them up, and then we will wrap our time together, which went by so quickly.
Well, I think everyone's explored the difference between what we all had to do to deliver content which was virtually all during COVID. So I think we've got a lot more practice with how to deliver content virtually, but it is a completely different beast. I mean, even Mark and I were talking yesterday about, okay, so maybe no swiveling in your chair. Like, do I look into down the barrel of the lens, or do I look at the people I'm talking to? I mean, just basics that we sometimes forget and don't think about. Our hand language, like where, we want it to be under our chest. So yes, Anna, there is different techniques for both, and both take something different. You want to make sure that you're not screaming into the lens, or you get too excited, or that again, you stay connected. And a lot of people delivering virtual content are cheating on notes. So you definitely have to make sure your eye focus. And Mark, we even talked about this. We've had some pre-records from events and people don't practice. And so they're reading. And if you're in a close-up, it's very obvious. So just be knowledgeable, realistic, and transparent about what kind of delivery you're doing if it's virtual. And then, of course, live, we touched on some of that today about how different that rehearsal process is as well, and the techniques for that as well. But it's, yeah, they're different ballparks completely. Mark, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Essentially, after COVID, of course, the bar of broadcast level quality went really down. But the expectation is that experts have to be able to do broadcast level work, and especially with the eye line. As you can see, I'm looking at people, but my eye line is not at you. But we had to reteach that, and then when they're reading and not looking at an eye line, that really distracts the viewer. So those techniques are super important. And of course, they vary by type of exec. So, and also with the language.
That's great. Thanks for adding the question in there, Anna. I think as we wrap, I'd love to ask one final question. I know we're a little over on time, but we've got that nice 15-minute buffer before the top of the hour. Mark and Allison, I'm just curious, as you are navigating the events that are to come, as you're in the midst of your event planning now, what has been the biggest standout learning for you as it relates to your content delivery and speaker training right here and now? Like what's kind of like a big learning or an aha that you've had in the season you're in right now?
Allison, I can go first and then you can wrap this up. But I think if you have the best intentions, you have the best laid out plans, you have the storyboard, you have the regimen, you just have to remember that change will happen and it's okay. And just be prepared to adapt to whatever that change is and move forward with the same level of confidence that you have for the whole process. And so expect change. Don't be scared of it. Expect it, anticipate it, write it out. Do a whole contingency plan of what could happen. We actually do that. It's super excruciating though, but we do that. It's like, what if this happened? What if that happened? But do scenario planning of the worst possible scenarios. You really should. And our fearless leader helps us drive that regimen too. So.
And with that contingency plan, have backup speakers.
Oh yes, yes.
Always have backup
understudies.
speakers.
Yeah,
Have understudies and have the understudies practice. Don't like throw them under the bus. Like, okay, well, this person has COVID or this person's gone. This flight didn't work out. Go. You have to prepare the understudy just as much as the actual presenters. We always have understudies, so it's fantastic. But I would say my biggest aha moment, and watching the change in the years and looking forward, is advocating for speaker coaching and really making sure that it's accessible and available, and push for it, because so many people will push it under the rug because they don't think it's important. But hopefully, as we learned today, it's one of the most, if not the most important last milestone of a good presentation, is using a speaker coach or using some support to really make sure that what your content is the message is clear, and that it's been rehearsed and practiced and you feel confident and great about it.
Yeah, I think that just the love of helping people share their brilliance, these great minds that were surrounded by smartest people, and supporting them in that last moment is super, super enriching. And they're super happy about it because they kind of go over their own expectations when they deliver something great.
And your speaker journey is never over. The learning about it and the practicing of it and the rehearsing of it and it's never over. And there's no one that's like, great, I never need to work on my speech, I'm perfect. And no one. It's always changing. It's always different. Every audience is different. So always remember to stay curious about yourself as a presenter.
That is all great advice. And Mark and Allison, just want to say thanks so much for sharing your passion, your heart, your insight, your experiences, your areas of expertise here with us today. Thank you so, so much. I feel like we could have gone on for another hour. The 45 minutes went by really, really quickly, but so appreciate you all joining us today. And thanks everyone who attended. We know that your time is precious and valuable. You have a lot on your plates. So the fact that you chose to spend today with us means the world. And today's session was brought to you by Session Board. And here at Session Board, we believe that event content and great, excellent speaker management lies at the heart of every successful event. And here, our focus is on continuous innovation in speaker and content management. And we've helped organizers and teams save hundreds of hours with a streamlined, modern experience using tools and technologies, from call to papers to evaluations to onboarding communication, to help event organizers work faster and have the most impactful events possible. So thanks so much for joining today. Thank you again, Mark and Allison. And this will be available on demand. We'll be in touch, and we'll see you next time. Cheers,
Bye,
y'all.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.